A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Once Jesus addressed this parable to those who were convinced of their own righteousness and despised everyone else. He said, "Two people went up to the temple area to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a tax collector. Now the Pharisee took up his position and spoke this prayer to himself. 'O God, I thank you that I am not like the rest of humanity, greedy, dishonest, and adulterous, or even like this tax collector. After all, I fast twice a week, and I pay tithes on my whole income.' Meanwhile, the tax collector stood off at a distance and would not even raise his eyes to heaven, but simply beat his breast and prayed, 'O God, be merciful to me, a sinner.' I tell you, the latter went home justified, not the former. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
As we listen to the words of Sirach in the first reading, and then as we listen to the parable that Jesus tells, it's obvious that they're both interested in talking about prayer. As a matter of fact, if you think back over the last few weeks, you'll notice that this is a theme that has cropped up more than once in the scripture passages. Now, I'm sure that there are grade school students here with us this morning who could tell us the various forms of prayer, the four traditional forms: petition and contrition, in other words, asking for something or seeking forgiveness, and then praise and thanksgiving, honoring the glory of God and expressing our gratitude. But I think there's something even more basic than that that we need to notice about prayer. It is, first and foremost, even before it is petition or contrition or praise or thanksgiving, it is simply putting ourselves in the presence of God. Just think for a moment about a long-lasting relationship you might have become part of, or you might have observed. Think, for example, of a couple who have been married for many years. Or think of a friendship that has unfolded over a great number of years. Notice what happens. Of course, when the couple come together or when the two friends meet, there are always questions to be answered and comments to be made. But first and foremost, there is that simple presence. Two people being there for one another without any need for verbal communication. As far as our relationship with God is, that's what prayer should be first and foremost. Now, to help us understand this, Jesus tells us a simple story, a parable, as we heard, involving a Pharisee, religious leader of the time of Jesus, and a tax collector, who might have also been called a publican. Not a Republican, a publican. Listen to the Pharisee pray. He's not really putting himself in the presence of God. He's rather strutting in his own presence. And he's very happy with what he sees. Basically, what he's doing, he's praying to himself and reminding himself of what a fine fellow he is. How different from the prayer of the tax collector. His prayer is very simple, and he begins by recognizing who he is in God's eyes. He puts himself in the presence of God, aware that God truly knows who he is. This, of course, is true humility. Now, this morning, if I were to be honest with myself, which one of these would be more like me when I pray? Or if you were honest with yourselves, which one of these would be most like you when you pray? So how do we do this? How do we put ourselves in the presence of God in a spirit of prayer? You might simply think of a gospel passage that you're familiar with, a gospel passage that involves Jesus and his disciples, and then simply put yourselves into the picture. Maybe Jesus and his disciples are in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. Put yourself into the boat. And before asking Jesus anything or seeking his forgiveness or praising him or thanking him, simply recognize that you are there with him and that he knows you and he accepts you. And in a spirit of prayerfulness, he is willing to put you in contact with his Father. If we can start our prayer like that, it will be truly fruitful. Listen to what Sirach says this morning. The prayer of the lowly pierces the clouds. And listen to the psalmist in our response. Those who are crushed in spirit, those who are humble, the Lord saves. So if we can begin our prayer like the tax collector, then in the imagery of Paul, we will be well on our way to finishing the race in a good fashion.